Hey everyone, this is joint work with a couple of people in New York. We're a US-based crew, I guess. Anyway, so this paper is about detecting ideology in economics. Some background here is that particularly in the United States, economics gets widely criticized as being an ideological field, whether it's a conservative, liberal, or just driven in some way. And since the financial crisis, this criticism has intensified. There was a documentary called Inside Job, basically talking about how economists seem to be bought, seem to be captured by industry. So what should we care about this? From an NLP perspective, one question is how far can we take these text-driven methods for ideology detection, both in supervised and unsupervised ways. Typically, these tasks have been done in domains where ideology is explicit, such as op-eds or politician speeches. Another issue is do topics matter, and when do they matter in this prediction? And then from a policy perspective, economists play a central role in decision-making processes in capitals around the world. So it's really important to be able to trust the opinions of these experts. And you would think that if these opinions are driven by ideology, then you need to weight that. You need to factor for that. So in this paper, we use ground truth ideological behavior, and we find its relationship with the text of academic papers in order to be able to predict. To see if we can predict the ideology of economists purely from their academic work. The idea being that there's institutions such as peer review which should clamp on the ability of a researcher's ideology to then be reflected in their academic publications. And this is kind of like an old conversation in economics. This guy, George Stigler, is founder of the Chicago School in the US, which is associated with conservative economics now. He argued that ideology does not affect economics. A more recent paper was survey-based. They found that there did seem to be a correlation between people's beliefs about public policy and their own values. An even more recent paper that's also based on surveys found a different result. They found no evidence that there was an ideological divide in economics. So that's kind of the state of the world as far as this goes. So why do we think that we should be able to detect ideology? So here's an example of a finding in a paper. Person on the right, Christina Romer, is a liberal economist. She worked for Obama. Person on the, I say right, I'm at left. The person on the right, Glenn Hubbard, worked for George W. Bush. Here's the important part. One of them writes, higher tax rates decrease the probability that the head of household will move to a better job. So the sentiment here is that higher tax rates are decreasing the chance of getting a better job. So who would say that, a liberal or a conservative? If you said a conservative, you'd be right. This is something that Glenn Hubbard wrote in an academic paper. Similarly, this is a liberal economist, conservative economist. The key part of the finding is tax cut lowers investments. Who would say that? A liberal economist. Finally, last motivating case, the necessary condition for contractionary tax cuts is probably satisfied for the US economy. So tax cuts being bad for the economy, that's what a liberal might think. In this case, this is actually a co-authored paper by these guys. One of them is liberal, the other one's conservative. So it seems like that there is a mapping between ideology and findings, but it's tempered by things like this as well. So how we get our ground truth ideology, we grab the roster of the American Economic Association for many years. We get about 53,000 authors. It should be noted that a lot of these guys didn't publish. They're in industry, so we're going to drop them eventually. We link it to campaign contribution data and also to petition signing data, and these petitions are overtly ideological, like support for John McCain or support for Barack Obama, whoops. And then, so this is record linkage tasks, details are in the paper. Basically, we come up with a classifier that has 95% accuracy and implies that we're getting this is a high precision classifier. So we recover about 21,000 contributions from 2,800 members. We drop the guys who didn't publish. That leaves us with about 7,000 contributions from 1,100 authors. We map each contribution to a party or no party. We also have those signatures I mentioned. That's 3,000 signatures and 1,500 authors. To keep things simple, we just map this to a one-dimensional domain. -1 is Democrat, 1 is Republican. Instead of using latent factor methods, because typically you need more than one latent factor to capture all the dimensions of ideology, we just use a simple rule. Details are in the paper. An interesting thing here is that when you look at the breakdown, so if I'm a Democratic economist and if I'm an economist and I make a contribution, I'm much more likely to be a Democrat. But if I'm a Republican, if I'm an economist and I sign a petition, I'm much more likely to be a Republican. So it's kind of interesting. Ironically, it seems that Democrats vote with their money, which is not what I would have expected. So for the text, we grab working papers from National Bureau of Economic Research, which is a premier research institute in the US, and also from JSTOR. That covers about 80,000 papers. We do the standard stuff. We represent text. This is an n-gram model, basically. We go from bigrams all the way up to 8 grams, which is unusual. The reason we go up that far is there's some recent work showing that if longer n-grams are more correlated with ideology. But I will say most of the action is happening in the lower order n-grams. At 100 n-grams, we drop ones that occur less than 5 times, and we rank them by chi-squared. So I don't know if this is completely visible, but so these are across all papers, across all topics. So these are the most left-leaning and most right-leaning bigrams, and so you'll see things like mental health, childcare, healthcare for the Democrats, and you'll see stock return, Federal Reserve, market value for the Republicans. So your first impression might be that this might just be driven by topics, which is a very valid concern. So then there's kind of like 2 states of the world that you can think about, where you would see a correlation between ideology and text. On the right, you have an ideology. It affects which topic you publish in. But once you're in that topic, ideology no longer comes into play. But there's still in the observation, there's still a correlation between ideology and text. In the other world, on the left-hand side, you have ideology, you choose your topic, but even within that topic, your ideology still affects your words. What that means that in order to be able to distinguish between between these 2 worlds, if we can control for topic and we can still predict your ideology from your words, it suggests that we're in the first state of the world and not in the second state. And so that's why we need to adjust for topics. We use 2 methods. We use supervised and unsupervised. Unsupervised is LDA. We use 30, 50, and 100 topics. For supervised, we take advantage of the fact that a lot of these papers are already coded with their own topics. And there's 2 levels of topics here. There's kind of like a broad topic, macro, micro, labor, and then there's a second level, which is a more fine-grained version of that top level topic. So we call these JEL1 and JEL2. And then so the end result is that we get phrase counts for each economist by their topic. Skip this part in the interest of time. And so here's what it looks like when you break it down by topic. This is the LDA wages topic. And it seems left-leaning phrases here talk about single mothers, childcare. On the right-leaning phrases, it's talk about overtime pay, overtime hours. For business cycles, the left-leaning people talk about Keynesian economics. Right-leaning people talk about laissez-faire economics, which kind of seems to make sense. You would expect them to talk about that. Both sides. And then just to recap, we have economists with the ground truth ideologies. We have the text of their papers. The representation is at the author level, so we collapse phrase counts across papers. For co-authored papers, each author gets the same count. We don't divide by a number of authors. Doesn't really matter if you do or not. And then if there's a co-authored paper and one of them is in the train, the other one's in the test, the guy in the test is not, we pretend like he didn't write the paper. So there's no contamination. Won't get into the details of the algorithm, but it's basically, for each topic, we do an ensemble where we do kind of attribute bagging and regular bagging, And basically each iteration for each topic is a vote of whether you're Democrat or Republican. And you get back this three-dimensional object where it's author by topic by party, and then you can sum across topics. You can do some function of that in order to get your prediction. And then we also compare this method with using this Bitter Lemons data set just to show that we can perform similarly to supervised and unsupervised models. Our models are the ones down there, the LD810 and no topics, and basically we can do about the same. Okay, so here's the results for economists. So basically, we're getting AUCs in the low 0.7s, which is not fantastic, but there's definitely a signal here that you can pick up ideology from academic writings. The best performing model is LDA50. We also ran it on a completely unsupervised model that it's TAM, the topic aspect model, and basically since ideology is not first order here, these unsupervised models just don't work. And then one other thing I'll point out is that it looks like that if you don't account for topics, you get this about the same performance. But one thing you'll notice is that there's a lot more data if you don't account for topics. So this no topics reduced, we try to match the data set size with LDA50, and you do notice that it's 0.74 AUC in the LDA50 and 707 for the no topics reduced. So it looks like you are getting some additional predictive power from accounting for topics. And then so we also wanted to validate with a data set that's completely unrelated to what we were doing. So this is a survey that I mentioned earlier. Basically, at the University of Chicago, they survey these top economists on what they think about minimum wage, about fracking, about various issues of political import. And these guys coded these answers as, for some of these questions, as if you agree, if you say a certain response, it implies you're conservative, and reverse for liberal. And so here's an example of a minimum wage question. And basically, so we ran an ordered logit of people's responses on their predicted ideologies and also on personal details about them, their gender, their profession, their field. And basically, there's a very significant, strong correlation between our predicted ideologies and their responses. And then interesting to note is that once you add personal characteristics, the increase in log likelihood, this is the difference between the second and third column, is actually very small. So it indicates that a lot of the action is coming from our predicted ideologies. So we have this companion paper where we take these predicted ideologies and we look at basically individual correlates ideology, what happens with the effect of editors' ideologies on journals, and also the correlation between our predicted ideologies and actual research findings, not just the text. I'll skip these. I'll just highlight this last one because I think it's kind of cool. So basically, the idea is that economists will report these things called elasticities, the idea being that, okay, so if a state increases the minimum wage, how much do you expect employers to hire? The idea being that conservatives think an increase in the minimum wage will reduce the amount that people will hire, and Democrats will have a different opinion. So we take these sorts of elasticities, things called taxable income elasticities, labor supply elasticities, we stack them all together and we compare them with the predicted ideology of the author, and these, so the top row and the lower left is the scatter between our predicted ideologies and a normalized version of these elasticities, and there's a definite trend. The more conservative you are, the more conservative your research finding is. And for sanity check, that on the lower right is the ground truth ideology versus the research finding, and you see a similar pattern. So it definitely does seem to suggest that there's a correlation going on, and this just shows that that these correlations are significant across our different topic mappings. And so in conclusion, economists are an important body of experts. Their perceived political neutrality is really important in the policymaking process. We suggest this method where you can recover ideology adjusting for topic. We find that academic writing can be predicted, can predict political ideology. We validate it with an external source, and we show that these ideologies actually correlated with people's research findings. And then for future work, we'd like to know if this happens in other sciences, and ideally include more sophisticated bias detection methods. Thank you.
Time for questions.
Thank you for the interesting talk. So you talked about scientific writing or scholarly writing.
Yes.
Probably one of the more common, sources of signal now is things like Twitter and Facebook and so forth. What would change if you go from this academic writing to more stuff that is, shorter, more terse?
So the main issue there is that a lot of these guys aren't on Twitter. So one thing that we're thinking about is actually using op-eds or books that people write, which are not peer-reviewed. Our hypothesis is that the signal will be much stronger there. Because if you just open up the Wall Street Journal, or if you open up New York Times, Paul Krugman is in this data set. I think it would be that signal will be much stronger.
Hi, it was quite interesting that you were also modeling the topics of the documents. So, but you have documents ranging from, some 90s to the present date. So did you observe any shift in the topics? And if you were to use your model for prediction for new documents or new authors that come up in future, so do you have any thoughts on how would you adapt your model for changing topics?
Sure. So we did notice that there's, back in the 80s, it was much more driven by macroeconomic, but in the 2000s, it's more labor economics, and I think that's actually has more to do with data. Back then, there was not a lot of data, so people could kind of write whatever they wanted to. Now there actually is data, and the data is typically in areas like micro, labor being one of them, as opposed to macro. There's a lot more interest in investigating models like that. As far as being able to detect a new topic that will come up, we would have to use something like a dynamic topic model in order to be able to pick that up. So one thing we'd like to do is to come up with a semi-supervised topic model in order to be able to pick this out, as opposed to the pipeline setup where we need to first go and get the topics and then do it. We like to kind of wrap it up into one method.
Hello. Yeah, very nice. But you say, so you're adjusting for topic, but it looked to me a bit like, even though you're if you fix a topic, then you could still get people picking subtopics within that topic, right? So have you really fully addressed?
Yeah, so that depends on how much you believe that we're actually controlling for topic, those two topics, those two ones that I showed you, I think there was a strong indication that was ideology, but then there were other topics that were much messier. Yeah, that's definitely something we thought about. So how far down do you have to go before you are actually hitting the ideological words, as opposed to sorting within subtopic? My sense is that the fact that one way to kind of address that is the fact that those elasticities that I showed you, if you look within those elasticities, those are people writing about the same topic. They're just coming up with a different number for that same topic, and you're still finding that correlation in there. So even if our topic mapping isn't completely clean, it does seem to be able to at least hit. It does seem to be correlated with enough of that signal to be able to pick it up. But I agree, it's not perfect by any means.
Okay, I just wanted to make one other comment. It'd be really cool to do the same thing with stuff that you read rather than stuff that you write. Did you think?
That is something that, yeah, that is a pilot project that we're trying to get off the ground, yes.
Cool.
Any more questions? Okay, I have a further question related to the first one. If you think maybe to apply in social media text in order to approach the problem from a profiling viewpoint, trying to profile the potential certain kind of ideology that could be sort of threatening. So from a security viewpoint, could be also interesting as application to try to spot some kind of ideology in social media. So do you think maybe in the future to move from a more formal text to informal social media also from this viewpoint?
So my gut instinct there is that in the social media space, people are less inhibited about expressing ideology. So I don't know if something as involved as this would even be necessary. But on the other hand, I think maybe after Snowden, there might have been a chilling effect where you might not be as overt. So that would argue for maybe you do need to a more kind of a sophisticated way to be able to pick out ideology than you had before, which would actually be an interesting test.
Okay, so if there isn't any further question, let's thank the speaker again.